There is a specific kind of grief that does not move. Not forward, not backward, not sideways. It simply sits in the center of everything and becomes the room that every other room is built around. Vincent Caruso had been building rooms around it for 10 years. The penthouse on the Upper East Side. The organization he had inherited from his father and expanded with the specific ruthless precision of a man who had replaced love with work and called the replacement acceptable. The woman he was seeing, beautiful, careful, patient in the way of someone who understood she was living in the shadow of something she could never be asked to compete with directly. He had built a life around the grief of losing Elena. He had not yet considered the possibility that Elena was not lost. Vincent Caruso was 44 years old and ran the Caruso organization from a corner office on the 31st floor of a legitimate real estate company on Park Avenue that was legitimate in the way that certain things are legitimate, on paper, in the filing cabinets of the appropriate regulatory bodies, in every surface document that anyone with standard access would ever find. Beneath the surface, the organization managed the specific infrastructure of power that Vincent's father Dominic had built from a Brooklyn neighborhood in the 1970s, and that Vincent had inherited at 32, and expanded into something considerably more sophisticated than what Dominic had imagined. He was tall, dark-haired, going gray at the temples, with the physical presence of a man who had not needed to use force himself in many years but whose body retained the memory of when he had. He wore good suits. He kept his office clean. He had, over 10 years of running the organization without his wife beside him, developed the specific contained quality of a man who has learned to manage the full range of his interior life without letting any of it reach the surface. His people respected him. His enemies were careful around him. His mistress, a 38-year-old woman named Diane Rourke, corporate attorney, elegant, genuinely intelligent, had been in his life for 2 years and understood, without it ever being stated, that she occupied a specific lane and that the lane had a boundary she had not been shown but could feel. The boundary was Elena. Elena Caruso had been 31 years old when the accident happened. 10 years ago, June, the harbor at Southampton. A private boat, their boat, the one Vincent had bought for their 5th wedding anniversary, had gone down in a storm that had come faster than the forecast predicted. The Coast Guard had recovered the boat, badly damaged. They had recovered the body of the deckhand, a man named Sal who had been with the Carusos for 6 years. They had not recovered Elena. The search had lasted 9 days. Vincent had stood on the Southampton dock for all 9 of them and watched the water. The official finding was death by drowning. The body unrecovered. A certificate issued on the basis of the evidence available. Vincent had not contested it. He had sat in the Park Avenue office for 3 days and had not come out and had not spoken to anyone. And on the 4th day he had come out and returned to work and had not spoken about Elena again, except in the specific controlled way of someone referencing a known and permanent fact. He missed her every day. This was the least adequate way to describe it and also the most accurate. He missed her every day with the specific full body missing of a man who had loved one person completely and had the one person taken from him before he was finished. He was in Rome on the last Tuesday of October when he saw her. The Rome trip was business, a meeting with the Conti family, a real estate partnership that existed on both sides of the legitimate line and required the specific in-person diplomacy that video calls could not provide. Vincent flew in Monday, met Tuesday, planned to fly back Wednesday. He had done this trip 4 times in 3 years. He knew the hotel, the restaurant where the Contis preferred to meet, the walk from the hotel to the restaurant along the Via Condotti that took 11 minutes at his pace. He was on that walk on the Tuesday evening after the meeting, later than expected, the October dark already complete, the street lit with the specific warm amber of Roman streetlight, when he stopped outside a restaurant he had never been inside and looked through the window. She was sitting at a table near the window. Dark-haired, 30, no, 41 now, he calculated automatically. She would be 41 now, with the specific quality of her face that he had not seen in 10 years, and that was as immediately recognizable to him as his own reflection. Not because she looked identical to the woman he had lost. Because she looked like the woman he had lost would look if she had lived 10 more years and carried something private, and had learned to hold herself differently to accommodate the weight of it. The slightly different angle of her jaw, the specific way she turned her head when she was listening to the left, a fraction, which Elena had always done and which he had loved and which was not a coincidence that could belong to a stranger. She was with a man, mid-40s, Italian, well-dressed in the Roman way. They were having dinner. She was laughing at something he had said, not Elena's laugh exactly, but the shape of the laugh, the way it arrived and departed, the specific quality of the sound. Vincent stood on the Via Condotti for 3 minutes and looked through the window at the woman who was not Elena and was Elena, and told himself he was wrong, that grief did this, that the mind found faces in the spaces where the lost used to be, that 10 years of missing someone was sufficient explanation for seeing them in the window of a Roman restaurant on an October evening. Then the woman turned her head and looked at the window. She looked directly at Vincent. And for exactly 2 seconds before her expression rearranged itself into the expression of a woman who does not recognize the man standing outside, before the professional blankness descended and she looked away and said something to the man across from her and picked up her wine glass. For exactly 2 seconds her face did something that only one face in the world had ever done in Vincent's direction. It recognized him. With terror, Vincent did not go into the restaurant. He walked back to the hotel and sat in his room and called Marco Vidal, who had been his most trusted operative for 14 years and who answered on the second ring regardless of the hour. Vincent described the woman, the restaurant, the man she was with. He gave Marco the table number, her approximate position in the room, the color of her dress, the specific quality of her face that he was not prepared to describe in words, but that Marco, who had known Elena, would understand when he saw the photographs. Everything, Vincent said. Name she is using, address, who the man is, how long she has been in Rome, and Marco quietly. Nothing moves until I tell it to move, Marco said. Vincent, just the name. The specific way Marco said his name when he needed Vincent to hear something he was about to say with full attention. If this is her, if it actually is, the question is not where she has been. The question is why. Vincent looked at the wall of the hotel room. I know what the question is. You are prepared for the answer, Vincent said. Get me the information anyway, Marco called back in 4 hours. It was 2 a.m. Rome time and Marco had been thorough in the specific way he was always thorough, which was completely, without gaps, with the kind of documentation that held up to scrutiny rather than collapsed under it. The woman's name in Rome was Sophia Marchetti. She had been in Rome for 8 years, registered as a resident at an address in the Prati district. Before Rome, she had been in Lisbon for 2 years under a different name that Marco had traced with more difficulty. Before Lisbon, and this was where Marco's voice acquired the specific careful quality of someone delivering information that changes the shape of a conversation. Before Lisbon, there was a gap of 8 months. And before the gap, there was Southampton. June. A boat. She is alive, Marco said. She is alive, Vincent said. What do you want to do? Vincent did not answer for a long moment. Then he said, the man she was with at dinner, tell me about him. Man's name was Alessandro Ferraro, 47 years old, Roman, a partner in an architecture firm with offices near the Pantheon. No criminal record, no organizational affiliations. By every available measure, an ordinary man, successful, comfortable, the specific kind of unremarkable that people who are genuinely unremarkable are and that people who are hiding something are not. Marco's assessment, which Vincent trusted more than most official documents, was that Alessandro Ferraro did not know who Sophia Marchetti actually was. He had met a woman 8 years ago who had arrived in Rome with a name and a history and a quiet quality of someone who had been through something large and had come out the other side of it. He had fallen in love with her. They had been together for 6 years. Vincent sat with this information for a long time. Diane called from New York at 8 a.m. Rome time. She called every morning when he was traveling, a pattern that had established itself over 2 years and that Vincent had never discouraged because it was useful to have someone who kept track of where he was. He answered and said he was extending the Rome trip by 2 days. Diane said she would adjust his calendar. She said she missed him. He said he would see her Thursday. He ended the call and looked at the Rome morning outside the hotel window and thought about a woman who had loved him and had been taken from him and had been in Rome for 8 years and had not called. That last thought was the one that required the most management. Not the grief of 10 years, that had a shape he understood. The possibility that she had chosen not to call, that she had been free at some point and had not called. That was a different shape entirely, and Vincent did not yet have the architecture for it. He got dressed, told Marco to set up a way to speak to her alone, and went downstairs for coffee. Marco arranged it through the restaurant. A note delivered with the lunch reservation Sophia Marchetti, table for one the following day at noon that said only, "I'm not here to hurt you. I am here because I watched you look at the window and I need to understand." It was not signed. It did not need to be. She came. Vincent was already at the table when she arrived. The same restaurant. Daylight this time. The specific different quality of a Roman restaurant in the afternoon. She walked in and saw him and stopped walking for exactly the length of time it took her to make the decision she had been making since she read the note. Then she came to the table and sat down. She was Elena. Completely and entirely Elena, with 10 years on her face, and a different name on her tongue, and the specific quality of someone who has been afraid for a long time and has learned to carry the fear so efficiently that it was only visible if you knew exactly where to look. Vincent knew exactly where to look. He had studied this face for 7 years of marriage and 10 years of missing it. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then she said, "How did you find me?" "I was walking," Vincent said. "I looked through a window." "That is not an answer. Is the true one." She looked at him across the table, the specific look of a woman who is calculating simultaneously how much she is in danger and how much she wants to stop calculating. "You should not be here," she said. "You being here puts me in danger." "From who?" She looked at the table, then she looked up. "Do you remember a man named Brendan Cole?" Vincent's face did not change. "Yes." "Arranged the accident. He paid Sal to sabotage the boat. Sal was supposed to make sure I did not survive. When I did survive, when I came up out of the water and Sal was already gone, someone else pulled me out. Someone who worked for Cole. He decided I was more useful alive." She said all of this in the flat, careful voice of someone who has rehearsed a version of this conversation with themselves for years and has stripped all the emotion out of the telling because the emotion was the part that made it impossible to say. "He gave me a new name, a new city. He told me if I contacted anyone from my previous life, he would kill you." Looked at her. "He told you he would kill me. You believed him." "Killed Sal to demonstrate that he was serious," she said. "He is serious." Brendan Cole was 61 years old and ran a financial services operation out of a building in Midtown Manhattan that was 2 blocks from Vincent's Park Avenue office. He had been a competitor of the Caruso organization for 20 years. Not a direct one, not in the territories that would have produced open conflict, but in the specific adjacent way of organizations whose interests occasionally collided, and whose management of those collisions had required, over the years, several conversations that were technically diplomatic and functionally threatening. Vincent had suspected Cole of several things over 20 years. He had never suspected him of this. The reason for taking Elena was one that Marco reconstructed over the following 48 hours from the combination of what Elena told Vincent at the restaurant and what Marco's investigation added to it. 10 years ago, Vincent had been in the process of acquiring a port operation in New Jersey that Cole wanted, and that the acquisition would have permanently shut Cole out of. Cole had concluded that the most efficient way to stop the acquisition was to destroy Vincent's capacity for decision-making, not by killing him, which would have produced a war that Cole calculated he could not win, but by removing the thing that Vincent Caruso most needed intact to function. Elena was not a target. She was a mechanism, a way of paralyzing the man who stood between Cole and the port without pulling a trigger that would end Cole's organization. It had worked. The acquisition had collapsed in the weeks following Elena's disappearance. Vincent had been unable to focus. The port had gone to a different buyer. Cole had gotten his access. Brendan Cole had taken Elena Caruso and given her a new name and a new city and a threat she believed, and had achieved exactly what he intended to achieve. For 10 years, Vincent sat in his Rome hotel room with this information and was very still for a very long time. "I need to go back," Elena said. They were in the hotel room. Vincent had judged correctly that this conversation required privacy and that a hotel room was the safest available privacy. She was sitting in the chair by the window, and he was standing, and neither of them had touched each other, which was the specific restraint of two people who understood that touching would change the nature of what needed to happen next, and what needed to happen next required clarity. "Alessandro," she began. "Know about Alessandro," Vincent said. She looked at him. "You had me investigated. I had the situation investigated. You were part of the situation. That is a very cold way to say it. It is the accurate way." He looked at her. "Do you love him?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I built a life, Vincent. I built it in the only direction available to me. I'm not going to apologize for building it." She looked at the window. "I thought about you every day. I want you to know that, every single day." She paused. "And I chose to believe Cole's threat every single day because the alternative was finding out I was wrong by watching you die." Looked at her face, the face he had been building rooms around for 10 years, and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Cole is going to answer for what he did. That is not negotiable, and it is not something I am asking your permission for." He paused. "What happens after that is a different conversation, one we can have when this one is finished." Looked at him. "You are going to handle Cole. Then, and then," Vincent said, "you will have options that you did not have before. What you do with them is yours to decide." He picked up his jacket. "But you are not going back to that apartment tonight. Marco has arranged somewhere safe." She opened her mouth. He said, "Not negotiable either." Marco had been with the Caruso organization since he was 22 years old, which meant he had been there for everything. The expansion under Dominic, the transition to Vincent, the accident, the 10 years of Vincent building rooms around grief. He was 51 now, methodical, with the specific calm of someone who had processed a great deal of alarming information over 3 decades and had developed the emotional infrastructure to receive it without visible disturbance. Received the information about Brendan Cole without visible disturbance. Then he said, "This needs to be handled correctly." Correctly meaning the kind of evidence that makes it permanent and the kind of method that does not produce a war. "Agreed," Vincent said. "Cole has 3 people in Rome. Insurance in case she ever ran. They have been watching her for 8 years without her knowing." Vincent absorbed this. "She has been watched for 8 years. Continuously." "Alessandro." They assessed him as non-threatening. They left him alone. Vincent thought about a man who had fallen in love with a woman and had spent 6 years building a life with her, and did not know that 3 people had been watching them from a distance the entire time. He thought about what Alessandro Ferraro was going to discover in the next several days, and what it was going to cost him, and whether there was a version of this where that cost was reduced. He did not find a version where the cost was reduced. "Make sure he is safe," Vincent said. "Whatever else happens, make sure he is not hurt," Marco said. "Already arranged." Operation that Marco executed over the following 48 hours was precise in the way that things are precise when they have been prepared by someone who has been doing this for 30 years and has no tolerance for imprecision. Cole's 3 people in Rome were removed from the situation without violence, detained, documented, and presented with the specific evidence of their own activities that made cooperation the obvious choice. Cole himself was reached through a channel that bypassed his organization entirely and was presented by Vincent in a phone call from Rome with a set of options that were not really options. Brendan Cole chose the one that did not produce a war. He had always been a practical man. Vincent flew back to New York on the Friday. Elena stayed in Rome, in the safe location Marco had arranged, while the situation resolved, and while she processed what processing 10 years of a life built in the wrong direction required. Marco stayed in Rome with her. This was Vincent's decision, and Elena had not argued with it, which told him something about the specific quality of her fear and the specific quality of what 10 years of living inside it had done to her sense of what was possible. Diane was at the airport. She had not been asked to come. She had tracked his flight in the app she used for his travel, and had appeared at arrivals with the composed attentiveness of a woman who understood, from the way Vincent had sounded on the phone over the past 4 days, that something had changed, and that being present was the appropriate response to change. She did not yet understand. Vincent saw her across the arrivals hall and stopped walking for a moment. He thought about what to say and how to say it, and in what order the words needed to come, and found, as he had found once before in Rome in a restaurant at noon, that the truest version was also the simplest. He walked toward her. She read his face on the approach with the specific intelligence of a woman who had spent 2 years learning to read a face that rarely showed anything directly, and by the time he reached her, she already knew the shape of what was coming even if she did not yet have the specifics. "Diane," he said. "Tell me," she said. He told her. Not all of it, there were parts that were not hers to carry, but the parts that mattered for what came next, that Elena was alive, that she had been taken, that she was in Rome, that this changed things in ways he could not yet fully map but that were honest enough for him to name clearly. Diane listened with her hands folded in front of her and her face doing the specific work of a woman receiving something that costs her and choosing to receive it with dignity rather than fracture. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Is she safe?" Vincent looked at her. "Yes." Diane nodded. "Good," she said and meant it and picked up her bag and walked toward the exit. He watched her go. She did not look back, which was the most dignified thing she could have done, and which Vincent understood and would not forget. Elena came back to New York on a Wednesday in November, 6 weeks after the Rome encounter. She came back not because Vincent asked her to, he had not asked her to, but because New York was where the unfinished things were, and Elena had spent 10 years discovering that unfinished things did not resolve themselves by distance. They required the specific uncomfortable presence of going back to the place where they were left. Alessandro had been told the truth. Marco had done this in person, at Alessandro's request, which told Vincent something about Alessandro Ferraro that made him respect the man without having met him. Alessandro had listened to the full account, had asked 3 questions, and had sat with the answers for a week before calling Elena. That conversation was Elena's and not Vincent's, and he did not ask what was said in it. He knew what the end of it was because Elena called him afterward and said, "I am coming back." That was sufficient. She walked into the Park Avenue office on a Wednesday morning, and Vincent stood up from behind the desk that his father had used, and that he had used for 12 years and looked at his wife. Because she was still his wife, legally, irrevocably, in the specific permanent way of things that had not been undone by anything except time, and time had not undone it. It had only made it more complicated, and neither of them tried to make it simple. "I don't know what this looks like from here," Elena said. "Neither do I," Vincent said. That is the honest answer. She looked at the office, the view, the filing cabinets, the desk, the evidence of the life he had built around the room that her absence had become. "You kept the painting," she said, "the painting above the credenza, a piece she had chosen, the one organizational decision she had made in this room." "I kept everything," he said. She looked at him. "I know you did." They did not have a reunion that morning. They did not have a resolution or a declaration or the specific dramatic reconstitution of something that had been broken. What they had was 2 people in a room, both of them older and more complicated than they had been the last time they were in a room together, beginning the slow and necessary process of finding out whether 10 years of separation and grief and survival and parallel lives built in different directions still left enough of a foundation for something going forward. It was not a simple question. They were not simple people. The answer was going to take time, real time, the kind that could not be rushed or resolved by a single conversation or a single decision. But Elena was in the room. She was alive, and she was in the room, and Vincent Caruso, who had been building rooms around her absence for 10 years, was standing in the same room as the thing he had been building around. That was not nothing. That was, in the specific vocabulary of a man who had spent a decade learning to measure what remained when everything you expected was gone. That was everything. Thank you for joining us. Make sure to drop your comment telling us where you're watching from. Don't forget to watch and subscribe. See you in the next one.